Chapter 1. The Awakening. Unmasking the Emotional Predator. There is a very specific, deeply unsettling moment in the life of anyone who has survived emotional abuse. It does not usually happen all at once, like a sudden clap of thunder. Instead, it is a slow, creeping dawn. It is the moment you look across the breakfast table, or glance at the passenger seat of your car, and realize that the person you have poured your entire heart into is a stranger. You look into their eyes, searching for the warmth, the profound connection, and the soulmate you were so certain you had found, but you are met with a chilling emptiness. It is a terrifying awakening. You realize that the confusion, the constant exhaustion, and the feeling that you are slowly losing your mind are not accidents. They are the deliberate results of being entangled with an emotional predator. When we hear words like predator or abuser, society has conditioned us to picture something obvious. We imagine loud, explosive violence, shattered glass, and unmistakable cruelty. We picture villains who are easy to spot and even easier to run away from. But the reality of psychological and emotional abuse is far more insidious. The predators we are talking about do not lurk in dark alleyways. They sit in our living rooms, they charm our parents, they host lavish dinners for our friends, and they wear smiles so convincing that the rest of the world thinks we are the luckiest people alive to have them. They are masters of disguise, hiding their profound lack of empathy behind a meticulously crafted mask of perfection. Think about a scenario that might feel entirely too familiar. Imagine a person who meets someone who seems to be the answer to every silent prayer they ever whispered. The courtship is dizzying. The new partner is deeply attentive, mirroring every hope, every dream, and every value. They speak of a shared destiny. They integrate flawlessly into the extended family, impressing the elders with their respect and charming the community with their generosity. Swept up in this whirlwind of validation, the person commits entirely. They merge their lives. They might empty their savings, pouring lakhs of rupees into a shared business venture or a beautiful new home, completely trusting the foundation they believe they have built. But then, the doors lock, the guests go home, the audience vanishes, and in the quiet of their own home, the mask begins to slip. It starts with small, almost imperceptible shifts. A condescending smirk when the person shares a deeply held insecurity, a sudden, freezing withdrawal of affection because the evening tea was brewed slightly wrong or because a minor disagreement arose over a family obligation. At first, the person rationalizes it. They think their partner is just stressed, overworked, or having a bad day. They apologize for things they did not do, eager to restore the magical peace of the honeymoon phase. But the coldness does not lift. It evolves into quiet mockery, endless silent treatments, and a shifting reality where the person is constantly told they are too sensitive, too demanding, or completely imagining things. This is the agonizing trap of the false self. An emotional predator does not possess a genuine, stable identity capable of authentic connection. Instead, they construct a false persona. This persona is a patchwork quilt of traits they have observed in others, designed specifically to extract admiration, resources, and devotion from the people around them. During the beginning of the relationship, they wore a mask custom-tailored to win you over. They studied your desires, your vulnerabilities, and your open heart, and they became exactly what you needed. That soulmate you grieve for never actually existed. It was a reflection of your own beautiful capacity for love, bounced back at you by a mirror completely devoid of its own light. When the mask inevitably slips, the cognitive dissonance is staggering. Your brain is caught in a brutal tug-of-war between two conflicting realities. On one hand, you have the memory of the charming, devoted partner who swept you off your feet. On the other, you have the cold, callous individual currently standing in front of you, treating you with utter contempt. To survive this psychological war zone, victims often turn the blame inward. You might have spent months or years twisting yourself into knots, trying to be more accommodating, more perfect, and more understanding, hoping to resurrect the person you thought you knew. But you cannot resurrect a ghost, and you cannot love a mask into becoming a real human being. Society often gets this entirely backward. There is a deeply rooted, incredibly damaging myth that people who fall prey to emotional predators are somehow weak, overly dependent, or lacking in intelligence.
People whisper behind closed doors, wondering why someone would stay in such a miserable situation, judging the victim for not simply walking away. But if you have lived this nightmare, you know that intelligence has absolutely nothing to do with it. These predators do not target the weak. They target the bright, the successful, the deeply empathetic, and the extraordinarily resilient. They chose you because you possessed everything they lacked. You had authentic joy, deep compassion, and a vibrant spirit. You had a light that drew them out of their own internal emptiness. They wanted to consume your energy, your resources, and your social standing. In a profoundly twisted way, your abuser was drawn to your magnificent strengths, but because they are pathologically envious of those very strengths, they made it their mission to dismantle them. They do not want to be with someone who is just like them. They want to conquer someone who represents all the beautiful human qualities they can never genuinely experience. It is incredibly common for empathetic people to try to diagnose their abuser's brokenness. We look at their cruelty and we search for a reason. We wonder if they suffered unspeakable trauma in their own childhood, or if they were raised in an environment that spoiled them so thoroughly that they never developed a conscience. We want to believe that beneath their hardened, abusive exterior is a wounded child who just needs enough unconditional love to heal. Your immense capacity for compassion wants to save them. But here is the absolute truth that you must anchor yourself to. Understanding the origin of their behavior does not excuse the devastation they are causing in your life. Whether their profound entitlement was born from childhood neglect or from being placed on an untouchable pedestal, the result is the exact same. They are currently operating as an adult who is making a conscious choice to manipulate, demean, and control you. They are aware of the pain they cause and they simply do not care. Pouring your precious life force into a bottomless void of entitlement will not heal them. It will only destroy you. Compassion is a beautiful trait, but when it is weaponized against you by someone who feels no remorse, you must redirect that compassion entirely toward yourself. You are not reading these words by accident. You are here because a deep, undeniable part of your spirit has recognized the truth. You are waking up. The heavy fog of guilt and confusion that has clouded your mind for so long is finally beginning to lift. It is vital to acknowledge the sheer courage it takes to look at your reality without flinching, to admit that the relationship you fought so hard to save is fundamentally broken by someone else's pathology. You are not crazy, you are not too sensitive, you have survived a calculated, invisible war. As we step forward into the reality of how these predators operate, we will shine a blinding light on their tactics. We will dismantle the architecture of their deceit so completely that they will never be able to use it against you in the dark again. You are reclaiming your mind, and this awakening is the very first step on your journey back to freedom.
Chapter 2. The Architecture of Deceit. Inside the Cycle of Abuse. There is a profound misconception that an emotionally abusive relationship is a chaotic, unpredictable storm. When you are standing in the center of it, it certainly feels that way. The wind howls, the ground shakes, and you are left endlessly dizzy, trying to anticipate where the next strike will come from. But once you step outside the storm and look back, a terrifying clarity emerges. You realize it was never chaos at all. It was a meticulously crafted, highly predictable machine. Emotional predators operate on a specific, cyclical blueprint of destruction. Understanding this architecture of deceit is not just validating, it is the ultimate key to unlocking your own psychological prison. The trap is always set with a phase of intense, overwhelming idealization, often referred to as love bombing. Imagine a woman, successful, fiercely independent, navigating the vibrant, chaotic streets of her city, completely content in her own life. Then she meets someone who seems to stop time. He does not just court her, he studies her. He mirrors her deepest values, mimics her passions, and floods her days with constant messages, claiming a profound, almost spiritual connection. He places her on a magnificent pedestal, making her the absolute center of his universe. Basking in this radiant, intoxicating attention, she opens the deepest vaults of her heart. She shares her childhood fears, her deepest insecurities, and her most treasured dreams, believing she is building a foundation of unbreakable trust. In reality, she is handing an emotional predator the exact ammunition he will soon use to destroy her. Because pedestals are incredibly narrow, the fall is a mathematical certainty. Once the predator feels he has secured her dependency, the honeymoon abruptly ends and the devaluation phase begins. It rarely starts with a massive explosion. It begins as a quiet, insidious erosion of her spirit. It is a sarcastic comment about the elegant way she dresses for a family function, cleverly disguised as a brutal joke. It is an inexplicable, freezing, silent treatment that lasts for days simply because she dared to express a differing opinion. The warm, attentive soulmate vanishes, replaced by a cold, critical stranger who views her strengths with pathological envy. The very traits he once praised as unique and brilliant are now twisted into flaws. Her natural confidence is suddenly labeled as arrogance, and her vibrant passion is mocked as exhausting and needy. This sheer emotional whiplash plunges the victim into a state of desperate confusion. To ensure she does not simply walk away, the abuser employs a powerful psychological hook known as intermittent reinforcement. He does not treat her terribly every single day. Instead, he doles out occasional, unpredictable moments of the old sweetness, a tender apology, a beautiful dinner, a glimpse of the man she fell in love with. Much like a gambler sitting at a slot machine, pulling the lever again and again for a rare, unpredictable payout, she becomes biologically addicted to the chaotic highs and lows.
She learns to walk on eggshells, constantly working harder, compromising her own boundaries, and trying to decode what she did wrong in a game where the rules are designed for her to fail. To further destabilize her sense of self, the predator introduces triangulation. He begins to weave other people into the fabric of their relationship to manufacture jealousy and insecurity. He might casually praise the brilliance of a female colleague, compare his partner unfavorably to a former lover, or flirt blatantly with a stranger in a bustling cafe. He plays the grand puppeteer, sitting back with a hidden smirk as he watches his partner compete for his fleeting attention. This cruel manipulation keeps her entirely focused on winning his approval, ensuring she is too distracted by manufactured rivalries to see the toxic reality of the abuse itself. When the sheer exhaustion of this dynamic finally pushes her to break down and confront him, he unleashes his most disorienting weapon of all, gaslighting. He looks her dead in the eye and denies that his abusive behavior ever happened. He tells her she is overly sensitive, that she is imagining things, or that she deliberately provoked his anger. By projecting his own malice onto her and constantly rewriting their shared history, he systematically dismantles her grip on reality. The psychological torture of gaslighting causes her to deeply mistrust her own memory and intuition, often leaving her tearfully apologizing for the very cruelty he inflicted upon her. Eventually, when the abuser has entirely depleted his partner's emotional reserves, or when she finally begins to assert her own boundaries, the cycle culminates in the discard phase. This abandonment is executed with a breathtaking lack of empathy, specifically designed to inflict maximum humiliation and leave her feeling utterly worthless. But the predator's self-preservation demands more than just her absence. He must also destroy her credibility. He launches a preemptive smear campaign enlisting a harem of supporters, friends, relatives, and even her own acquaintances to spread vicious rumors. He masterfully plays the innocent victim, attempting to isolate her completely so that no one will believe her truth. Yet the cycle is a circle, not a straight line. Just as the dust begins to settle and she undertakes the grueling work of piecing her shattered soul back together, the predator may attempt to return. This is hoovering, a tactic used to suck the victim right back into the vortex of trauma. A sudden, tearful phone call, a manufactured crisis, or a nostalgic message is deployed not out of genuine remorse or love, but simply to regain control and prove that he still holds power over her. Recognizing this mechanical, predictable cycle is your absolute armor. Once you see the architecture of their deceit, you realize that none of the abuse was ever a reflection of your worth. It was always a reflection of their profound emptiness. You are not a pawn destined to be played. You are a magnificent human being waking up to the truth, ready to step off their battlefield once and for all. Chapter 3. The Science of the Trap. Why we stay tethered. There is a question that haunts the quiet, sleepless hours of the night, long after the immediate danger has passed. It is a question whispered into tear-soaked pillows and pondered over a steaming cup of strong ginger chai in the early hours of the morning. Why did I stay? It is a question loaded with a crushing, suffocating shame. Society, often comfortably ignorant of the realities of psychological warfare, loves to ask this question with a judgmental tilt of the head. People who have never stood in your shoes might casually remark that they would have walked out the door the very first time they were disrespected. They do not understand that walking away from an emotional predator is not like leaving a bad movie or quitting a difficult job. It is like trying to untangle yourself from a deeply rooted biological addiction where your own mind and body have been hijacked and weaponized against you. You did not stay because you were weak, lacking in intelligence, or fundamentally broken. You stayed because your brain was fundamentally altered by the trauma you were enduring. To truly understand this invisible prison, we must look at what happens to the human brain when it is subjected to chronic, inescapable stress. Imagine being caught in the absolute center of a bustling, gridlocked city junction during the peak of summer. The heat is blistering, the blaring of horns is deafening, and auto rickshaws and cars are pressing in from every conceivable angle. There is no clear path forward, and reversing is impossible. If you are stuck in that chaotic trap long enough, your initial panic eventually gives way to a profound, paralyzing exhaustion. You stop gripping the steering wheel so tightly. You surrender to the gridlock. This is a psychological phenomenon known as learned helplessness. When a person is continually subjected to an abusive environment where their efforts to communicate, set boundaries, or seek peace are constantly thwarted and punished, the brain eventually learns that escape is futile. The paralysis you felt, that heavy inability to just pack your bags and leave, was not a moral failing or a lack of willpower. It was a deeply ingrained physiological survival mechanism. Beneath this paralysis lies a dizzying, potent cocktail of biochemicals that physically bonds the victim to the abuser. Let us consider a young man sitting in his dimly lit apartment, the monsoon rain lashing against his window pane. His partner has not spoken to him in 3 days, offering only a freezing, punitive silence because of a perceived slight. He checks his phone every 5 minutes, his stomach tied in agonizing knots, his heart racing with anxiety. Then, suddenly, the screen lights up with a message. It is not an apology, but a simple, affectionate nickname, followed by an invitation to his favorite local street food stall. In that exact moment, a massive wave of relief washes over him. This is not just emotional relief. It is a literal flood of dopamine crashing through his brain. Dopamine is the very same neurotransmitter responsible for cocaine addiction, and it creates profound reward circuits that tell the brain to repeat whatever action just brought relief. The abuser intuitively understands how to manipulate this chemical system through intermittent reinforcement. By sporadically withholding affection and then randomly rewarding the victim with tiny scraps of love, the predator turns the relationship into a high-stakes slot machine. The unpredictability of the reward actually causes dopamine to flow more intensely than if the love were consistent and secure. Alongside this dopamine rush is oxytocin, the bonding hormone released during moments of physical intimacy, shared laughter, or deep conversations. When the abuser expertly mirrors your deepest desires during the idealization phase, your brain is flooded with oxytocin, cementing a profound sense of trust and attachment. When the abuse begins, your brain does not simply discard this oxytocin. Instead, it craves the return of that intense, loving connection, driving you to work tirelessly to earn back the affection of the person who is simultaneously destroying you. This intoxicating mix of dopamine and oxytocin is brutally contrasted by the constant, thrumming presence of fear. Living with an emotional predator means your body is constantly marinating in cortisol and adrenaline, the hormones responsible for the fight-or-flight response. Think of the sheer physical dread you experience when you hear the familiar click of the front door unlocking, never knowing which version of your partner is about to walk into the hallway. Will it be the charming, generous lover or the cold, critical tyrant? This perpetual state of hypervigilance exhausts the body. But paradoxically, the adrenaline released during these terrifying moments actually strengthens the traumatic bond. Surviving a deeply distressing, fearful experience alongside someone, even when they are the source of the terror, cements a trauma bond that is notoriously difficult to break. You become an adrenaline addict without even realizing it, craving the intense, chaotic rush of the relationship because normal, peaceful interactions begin to feel dangerously quiet and unfamiliar. The cumulative weight of this daily emotional violence does not simply vanish when you finally manage to physically leave the room. Prolonged psychological torment, the endless gaslighting, the quiet degradation, and the dizzying cycle of idealization and discard can fundamentally alter the architecture of your mind, leading to complex post-traumatic stress disorder. Unlike a single, isolated traumatic event, this trauma is a death by 1,000 cuts. It leaves lingering ghosts that follow you long after the relationship has ended. You might find yourself sitting peacefully in a sunlit courtyard, only to hear a stranger use a specific condescending tone of voice. Instantly, your chest tightens, your breathing becomes shallow, and you are plunged into an emotional flashback, experiencing the exact same terror and shame you felt years ago. Your inner critic, having completely internalized the abuser's cruel voice, constantly whispers that you are defective, unworthy, and unlovable. Understanding this deep biological reality is the ultimate antidote to the toxic shame you have been carrying. You must look at yourself with the most profound, unwavering compassion. You are not a fool for staying, and you are not weak for hoping things would get better. Your beautiful, empathetic brain was subjected to an invisible, highly calculated psychological siege. You were fighting a war against an opponent who weaponized your own biology against you. But the human brain is a marvel of neuroplasticity, capable of magnificent healing and rewiring. Just as your mind was conditioned to survive in a war zone, it can absolutely be trained to thrive in the sunlight of peace. Acknowledging the profound science behind the trap is what finally allows you to step out of it, shedding the heavy cloak of self-blame and stepping fiercely into the reality of your own incredible resilience. Chapter 4. The Escape. Breaking the Chains. Safely. Ending a relationship with an emotional predator is undeniably one of the most agonizing, monumental, and courageous tasks a human being can undertake. If you have ever tried to leave, you already know that this is nothing like a normal breakup. When two healthy individuals part ways, there is often mutual sadness, a period of mourning, and eventually, a sense of closure. But severing ties with a narcissistic or sociopathic abuser is a completely different reality. You do not just pack your bags and walk away into a peaceful sunset. You find yourself walking on eggshells, biting your nails in sheer anticipation of a retaliatory smear campaign, and bracing yourself for a terrifying emotional withdrawal. The predator will not offer you a graceful exit. They will not respect your need for space, nor will they apologize and wish you well. They view you as an object, a source of supply, and they firmly believe that only they have the right to discard you. Recognizing this fundamental truth is the first step in planning an escape that protects your mind, your body, and your future. Because the nature of these relationships is so complex, there is no single cookie-cutter method for leaving. The ideal scenario, of course, is to recognize the predator for who they are and walk away immediately, completely cutting all ties. This absolute immediate departure is absolutely necessary if there is any presence or threat of physical aggression, or if the emotional environment has become dangerously toxic. In these highly volatile situations, you do not wait for the perfect moment or a peaceful conversation. You execute your departure with military precision. You create a safety plan, gather your essential documents, inform a trusted friend or family member of your exact whereabouts, and step out of the door without a backward glance. You prioritize your physical and emotional safety above all else, completely bypassing the need for a final confrontation. However, many survivors find themselves deeply entangled in circumstances where an overnight disappearance feels impossible. Consider a scenario where a person has spent over a decade building a life with their abuser. They might share young children, a sprawling family business, or deeply intertwined finances. In such complex webs, a different strategy is required. This is the quiet, methodical process of weaning off the drug. In this scenario, you do not announce your departure. Instead, you create a silent fortress within your own mind, while pretending that everything is normal to keep the highly suspicious predator off your back. You begin working tirelessly behind the scenes. You consult with an attorney who deeply understands high-conflict divorces and personality disorders. You quietly secure your finances, untangle your assets, and begin building a private support network. It requires immense psychological endurance to sit across the dining table from your abuser, nodding at their provocations, all while secretly knowing that you are orchestrating your ultimate freedom. For others, the escape happens through reaching an absolute pain threshold. This is the moment when the sheer exhaustion of the abuse finally outweighs the fear of leaving. To reach this point safely without losing your grip on reality, many survivors find it necessary to document the abuse. By keeping a private record of the insults, the gaslighting, and the betrayals, you create an anchor to the truth, preventing the abuser's inevitable love bombing from pulling you back into a state of amnesia. When you reach that breaking point, you can cement your departure by creating an unbreakable contract with yourself. This means taking one definitive, irreversible step that would be far too humiliating or difficult to backtrack on. It could be sending a clear final message to the abuser, ending things, or disclosing the hidden reality of your abuse to a deeply trusted friend, asking them to hold you fiercely accountable to your decision. By bringing the truth into the light, you effectively burn the bridge back to the toxic relationship. Sometimes, when immediate departure is complicated by shared custody or unavoidable proximity, survivors employ the strategy of becoming profoundly uninteresting to their abuser. Emotional predators thrive on high stimulation. They feed on your tears, your anger, and your desperate attempts to defend yourself. If you completely strip away your emotional reactions, offering only the most boring, monotone responses imaginable, you starve the predator of their vital supply. Eventually, the abuser grows restless and bored, turning their predatory gaze elsewhere and discarding you, providing you with the quiet space you desperately need to finalize your physical escape. Regardless of the specific strategy you use to break the physical chains, the immediate aftermath of the escape is a uniquely disorienting landscape. During the idealization phase, the abuser systematically monopolized your entire existence. They consumed your time, your energy, and your thoughts, isolating you from the world until they became your only source of validation. When you finally step out of their shadow, the sudden silence can feel deafening. The vast, empty space they leave behind is incredibly triggering, often driving survivors straight back into the arms of their abuser just to stop the aching withdrawal. To survive this critical window, you must deliberately and aggressively fill that void by reclaiming your life outside of the trauma. This reclamation begins with returning to your physical body. The chronic stress of an abusive environment leaves your system flooded with cortisol and adrenaline. To flush out this toxic chemistry, you must engage in deliberate physical movement, whether it is rolling out a mat for a grueling yoga session, running through the quiet morning streets of your neighborhood, or losing yourself in the rhythm of a dance class. Physical exertion releases endorphins that actively combat the chemical withdrawal of the trauma bond. You are literally sweating out the biological addiction to your abuser. Simultaneously, you must consciously rebuild your social ecosystem. The predator worked tirelessly to isolate you, convincing you that no one else could possibly understand or love you the way they did. You prove them wrong by stepping back into the warmth of genuine human connection. This is not the time to seek out a new romantic partner, as your emotional compass is still recalibrating, and the vulnerability of a fresh wound can attract new predators. Instead, you lean entirely on platonic love. You reconnect with the friends you lost touch with, you attend community events, and you surround yourself with people who validate your reality and celebrate your authentic spirit. You remind your brain that safe, unconditional love exists abundantly in the world. Finally, you must resurrect the passions and purposes that the abuser forced you to abandon. Emotional predators are pathologically envious of your talents and dreams, and they spend years mocking or sabotaging your deepest ambitions. The ultimate act of rebellion is to pick those dreams back up. If you always wanted to write, you sit down and you write. If you put your career on hold to manage their manufactured crises, you throw yourself back into your professional ascent. By focusing intensely on your own personal growth, your creativity, and your unique contribution to the world, you shift your life's center of gravity entirely away from the abuser. Stepping out of the psychological prison of an emotional predator is the most profound victory you will ever claim. It requires breaking the deeply ingrained habit of projecting your own beautiful morality and empathy onto someone who possesses neither. It demands extreme, unapologetic self-care. It is a brutal, exhausting transition. But the moment you stop waiting for the predator to change and decide to rescue yourself, the healing truly begins. You are no longer a source of supply. You are a survivor who has just taken the pen back to write the rest of your own magnificent story. Chapter 5. The Fortress of Silence. Mastering detachment. There is a profound, echoing quiet that descends the moment you finally walk away from an emotional predator. After months or years of deafening chaos, unpredictable rage, and dizzying manipulation, the sudden stillness can feel almost unnatural. You might expect to feel an immediate, euphoric sense of freedom, but instead, you are often met with a heavy, terrifying withdrawal. This is the critical juncture where your survival relies entirely on constructing an impenetrable fortress. We call this fortress no contact, but it is far more than simply blocking a phone number. It is the absolute, uncompromising severance of the toxic tether that has bound your mind, body, and spirit to someone who was systematically dismantling your life. To master this detachment, you must first understand why it is so non-negotiable. An emotional predator does not view a breakup the way a healthy human being does. They do not experience genuine heartbreak, nor do they reflect on their actions or respect your desire for space. To them, you are not a grieving partner. You are a vital source of narcissistic supply. You are the fuel that feeds their grandiosity, and they will not let that fuel source simply walk out the door without a vicious fight. Therefore, no contact must be absolute. It means no text messages, no late-night phone calls, and absolutely no browsing their social media profiles to see if they are missing you. It also means shutting down the avenues of indirect communication, firmly telling mutual friends and family members that you will not entertain any updates, gossip, or messages passed along on their behalf. The moment you erect this boundary, the predator will almost certainly test it. This is the highly predictable phase known as hoovering, designed to vacuum you right back into the eye of the storm. Imagine sitting on your balcony on a quiet evening, the oppressive summer heat finally breaking into a cool breeze, feeling a fragile sense of peace. Suddenly, your phone illuminates with a message from an unknown number. It is them. The message might be a tearful, desperate apology, a sudden medical emergency, or a completely mundane question about a misplaced household item. It is carefully calibrated to trigger your immense capacity for compassion. Your instinct, honed by years of conditioning, will scream at you to respond, to comfort them, or perhaps to angrily tell them to leave you alone. But you must understand that to an emotional predator, any response, even a furious, venomous rejection, is a massive victory. It proves that they still hold the remote control to your nervous system. By maintaining your silence, you strip them of their power entirely. Consider a man who finally leaves an abusive partner and moves into a new apartment. He blocks her on every conceivable platform. For 3 weeks, he begins to sleep through the night. Then, he steps out of a bustling local market, his hands full of fresh vegetables, and sees her standing by his scooter. She is crying, begging for 5 minutes to explain, looking as vulnerable and sweet as the day they first met. The biological urge to comfort her is staggering, but he remembers the architecture of deceit. He knows that the vulnerable woman standing before him is merely a mask, and behind it lies the exact same cruelty that drove him to leave. He does not engage, he does not argue. He simply turns around, walks back into the crowded street, and calls a trusted friend to come meet him. That is the essence of the fortress. It is choosing your own survival over their manufactured crisis. Building this fortress is grueling work because the withdrawal symptoms are incredibly real. Your brain, addicted to the chaotic highs and lows of the abuse cycle, will desperately seek a hit of the old, familiar pain. There will be moments when the urge to reach out feels physically agonizing. In these moments, you must actively redirect that frantic energy. When your fingers itch to type their name into a search bar, pick up a pen and write a letter to yourself instead, detailing every cruel thing they ever did to you. When you feel the desperate need to hear their voice, call a validating friend or a support hotline. Step outside into the vibrant reality of your neighborhood. Let the blaring horns, the vivid colors of the street vendors, and the bustling energy of the world ground you in the present moment. You must create a vast, reliable menu of alternative actions to deploy the absolute second the craving strikes. Of course, there are deeply complex situations where absolute silence is a legal or practical impossibility. You might share custody of young children, or you might be deeply entangled in a protracted legal battle over shared businesses and assets. In these scenarios, no contact morphs into low contact, and your fortress becomes a matter of strict, impenetrable boundaries. You must become profoundly boring to the predator. This means removing every single ounce of emotion from your interactions. You communicate strictly in written form, responding only to logistical facts. If they send a 10-paragraph email filled with venomous accusations, gaslighting, and threats, ending with a single sentence about school fees, you completely ignore the provocation. You reply with one clinical, factual sentence addressing the school fees. You do not defend your character. You do not argue the past. You offer them a flat, grey surface that provides absolutely zero emotional reflection. As you navigate this treacherous terrain, you must throw away the heavy weapon of self-judgment. Healing from a profound psychological hijacking is not a perfect linear upward climb. It is a messy, winding road, and slipping up is an incredibly common part of the journey. If, in a moment of intense loneliness or profound exhaustion, you answer their call or look at their photograph, you have not failed. You have not erased all your progress. The predator has spent an enormous amount of time embedding deep triggers within your psyche, and occasionally, one of those triggers might trip you up. When a relapse happens, you do not shame yourself. You treat yourself with the exact same fierce, protective compassion you would offer a dearest friend. You gently forgive yourself, you block the number again, and you add another brick to your fortress. Mastering detachment is the ultimate reclamation of your soul. It is the realization that your presence, your energy, and your attention are sacred resources. For too long, you freely handed those resources to someone who only used them to fuel your destruction. Now you are closing the vault. Every day of silence is a massive, triumphant victory. Every ignored provocation is a reclaiming of your territory. The predator thrives on noise, drama, and conflict, but they are absolutely powerless against your silence. By building and holding your fortress, you are making the most powerful statement possible. The game is over, the supply has dried up, and you are finally irrevocably free. Chapter 6. Rewiring the Mind, the Holistic Path to Healing. Once the heavy gates of your fortress of silence have swung shut and the frantic attempts of the emotional predator have been blocked out, a profound realization settles over you. The physical threat has been removed, but the battlefield has merely shifted inward. The predator is no longer sitting across the dining table, but their voice continues to echo through the corridors of your mind, whispering the very same cruelties and sowing the very same doubts. This is the harrowing reality of trauma. It does not simply evaporate the moment you pack your bags and leave. Because the abuse was chronic and insidious, it fundamentally altered the neural pathways of your brain, conditioning your nervous system to exist in a perpetual state of high alert. True recovery, therefore, is not a passive waiting game where time supposedly heals all wounds. It is an active, deeply intentional process of rewiring the mind and purging the trauma from your body. The journey begins by addressing the deeply entrenched habit of people-pleasing, a behavior that was likely weaponized against you by your abuser. In the context of an emotionally violent relationship, people-pleasing was not a character flaw. It was a highly sophisticated survival mechanism. When your abuser raged or subjected you to a punishing silent treatment, you learned to shrink yourself, to constantly apologize, and to anticipate their every need just to keep the peace. This is known as the fawn response. But what served as a life raft in the turbulent waters of abuse becomes a heavy anchor in a life of freedom. Eradicating this habit requires you to sit with the immense discomfort of setting a boundary and letting someone else be disappointed. Imagine an evening where an extended family member makes an unreasonable demand on your time and resources, fully expecting your usual compliant agreement. In the past, the sheer terror of their disapproval would have forced a breathless yes from your lips. Now you take a slow, grounding breath and politely but firmly decline. The ensuing guilt might feel physically agonizing at first, a phantom reflex from the days of your captivity. But as you hold that boundary, you are actively dismantling the toxic programming that made you a magnet for exploitation. To uproot these behaviors completely, you must often journey back to their origins through inner child work. Predators possess a terrifying radar for unresolved childhood wounds, and they frequently exploit the vulnerabilities you have carried since you were small. Healing requires you to connect with that younger version of yourself, the child who perhaps felt unseen, unheard, or fundamentally unlovable. Picture sitting quietly in a safe, sunlit room, closing your eyes and vividly imagining that younger you standing before you. You must look into their eyes and offer them the absolute unconditional protection, validation, and fierce love that they were historically denied. You must tell them that the abuse they endured, whether in childhood or at the hands of the recent predator, was never their fault. By actively reparenting this inner child, you replace the deep-seated feelings of defectiveness with a profound, unshakable sense of worthiness. Simultaneously, you must wage war on the vocabulary of the abuser through a practice known as reverse discourse. Throughout the devaluation phase, the predator systematically translated your beautiful strengths into horrific flaws, using a language of cruelty designed to make you self-destruct. They planted a venomous inner critic in your mind that continues to operate long after they are gone. Reverse discourse is the conscious, aggressive rewriting of that narrative. When the internalized voice of the abuser whispers that you are entirely incompetent because a project at work faced a minor setback, you do not simply let the thought pass. You forcefully talk back. You remind yourself of your intelligence, your staggering resilience, and your undeniable track record of survival. You substitute every self-defeating lie they planted with an empowering, undeniable truth about your own capability. You replace their language of degradation with your own fierce language of self-compassion. Because this trauma is not just psychological but deeply physiological, traditional talk therapy, while incredibly vital for validation and cognitive restructuring, is often not enough on its own. The sheer terror of the abuse is frozen in the non-verbal emotional centers of your brain and stored as heavy tension in your muscles. To thaw this frozen trauma, survivors must explore holistic body-based healing modalities. Practices like eye movement, desensitization, and reprocessing can help the brain reprocess traumatic memories so they no longer trigger an overwhelming physiological response. But healing also happens outside the therapist's office. It happens when you step onto a yoga mat, focusing entirely on the rhythm of your own breathing, finally teaching your terrified nervous system that it is safe to inhabit your own body again. It is the profound, quiet catharsis of stretching limbs that spent years curled into a defensive posture. You must also invite the immense healing power of nature and the arts into your daily routine. There is a staggering medicine in simply walking away from the noise and grounding yourself in the natural world. Imagine walking through a quiet, lush garden, the ground soft beneath your feet, the vibrant canopy of a blooming gulmohar tree offering shade from the intense afternoon sun. You listen to the distant rhythmic ringing of evening arti bells echoing from a nearby temple, letting the ancient, soothing sounds wash over your fractured spirit. You turn to music therapy, creating playlists of powerful, uplifting songs that drown out the lingering anxiety and physically shift your mood. You might pick up a paintbrush, throwing colors onto a canvas to express the raging, complex emotions that are far too dense for ordinary words. These actions are not just hobbies. They are critical therapeutic interventions that activate the reward centers of your brain, releasing natural endorphins that replace the toxic biochemical addiction you once had to your abuser. This holistic path to healing is how you build your ultimate immunity against future predators. By integrating the mind, the body, and the spirit, you are not merely surviving the aftermath of devastation. You are becoming the absolute superhero of your own life. You are meticulously reconstructing your identity, brick by brick, ensuring that the foundation is no longer built on the shaky ground of someone else's approval, but on the bedrock of your own profound self-love and unyielding agency. Chapter 7. Predators in the Wild. Navigating Toxic Dynamics Beyond Romance. When we first awaken to the reality of emotional predators, our focus is naturally consumed by the romantic devastation we just survived. We tend to believe that if we can simply lock the door against that one toxic lover and heal our shattered hearts, our lives will be entirely safe. But as the fog of that specific trauma clears and our newly sharpened instincts begin to scan the horizon, we start to detect a terrifyingly familiar pattern in the wider world around us. We realize that emotional predators do not only share our beds, they sit at the head of our own dining tables. They occupy the corner offices of our workplaces, and they smile warmly at us in our closest social circles. The deeply unsettling truth is that pathological entitlement and a profound lack of empathy are not confined to courtship. To truly protect the magnificent life you are rebuilding, you must learn to identify and disarm these toxic dynamics in every single sphere of your existence. Perhaps the most agonizing realization happens within the very walls of our childhood homes. Society, and particularly our deep-rooted cultural traditions, conditions us to believe that family is an unbreakable, sacred bond.
We are taught from a very young age that to endure familial hardship is a noble duty and that absolute respect for our elders is paramount, regardless of how they treat us. But imagine a household where a parent operates as a grand puppeteer, deliberately pitting siblings against one another to secure their own absolute control over the family dynamic. Imagine a parent who uses their child's brilliant successes merely as a trophy to flaunt at extended family gatherings and weddings, but behind closed doors, they brutally dismantle that same child's self-esteem with relentless, envious criticism. Or consider an elder who demands ultimate submission, utilizing crippling guilt and the terrifying threat of familial exile whenever their absolute authority is questioned. A victim in this environment is trapped in a devastating, lifelong loop. They are constantly pouring their devotion into an empty vessel, twisting themselves into shapes of perfect obedience, hoping to finally earn a love that should have been unconditionally theirs from birth. Breaking away from a toxic bloodline requires an unparalleled, almost unthinkable level of bravery. It means challenging the heaviest societal taboos and realizing that sharing DNA does not give anyone a free pass to continuously assault your mental health. It requires establishing fierce, uncompromising boundaries, and sometimes it means mourning the agonizing loss of a parent or relative who is still very much alive, but who is entirely incapable of offering genuine love. You must learn to parent yourself, realizing that your chosen family of validating friends can offer the sanctuary your bloodline never could. This pathology also bleeds seamlessly into our friendships, often hiding beneath the comfortable guise of camaraderie. Think of a friendship that feels less like a mutual bond and more like an exhausting, one-sided performance. There is always that one friend who manages to subtly diminish your brightest, most joyful moments. If you excitedly share the news of a hard-earned promotion, they do not celebrate you. Instead, they counter it with a backhanded compliment about the toll the new job will undoubtedly take on your personal life, effectively extinguishing your joy. They thrive on manufactured drama, constantly whispering venomous gossip to triangulate the social group, ensuring they remain firmly at the center of the chaos. When you are going through a profound crisis, they are either inexplicably absent, or they somehow twist the situation to make themselves the ultimate victim, demanding that you comfort them while your own world is falling apart. A true friendship is a sanctuary of mutual celebration, deep comfort, and effortless reciprocity. When you recognize that a long-standing friend is merely an emotional vampire draining your vital energy to feed their own pathological envy, you must grant yourself the permission to quietly, firmly close that door. You do not owe them an explosive confrontation or a lengthy, justified explanation. You simply redirect your precious energy toward people who genuinely want to see you shine, letting the toxic friendship wither away from a lack of supply. Navigating this toxicity becomes particularly treacherous when it invades our professional lives, because our very livelihood is often on the line. You might step into the office every morning, warm tea in hand, ready to tackle your tasks, only to be met by a supervisor or colleague who operates on pure, malicious sabotage. This is the manager who routinely steals credit for your most brilliant ideas in high-stakes meetings, smiling charmingly at the upper management while systematically gaslighting you in private performance reviews. This is the co-worker who deliberately withholds crucial information to ensure your project fails, subsequently launching a covert smear campaign by the water cooler to ruin your professional reputation. Because walking away from a job is rarely an immediate option, you must deploy your survival toolkit with absolute clinical precision. You become a master of documentation. You ensure every single instruction, every agreement, and every interaction is recorded in writing to prevent their inevitable attempts to rewrite history and shift the blame. You adopt a thoroughly emotionally impenetrable demeanor. You do not share personal details about your weekend. You do not react to their manufactured provocations, and you offer them absolutely nothing but flat, boring professionalism. By starving them of the emotional reaction they desperately crave, you protect your career and your sanity while you meticulously plot your exit strategy to a healthier, more supportive work environment. Finally, we must confront the faceless predators that roam the digital landscape and the broader society. Cyberbullies and internet trolls operate on the exact same psychological blueprint as the domestic abuser, utilizing the vast anonymity of the internet to inflict pain without facing any real-world consequences. They launch vitriolic attacks on your social media, desperate to provoke a reaction that will briefly alleviate their own profound internal emptiness. Engaging with them, attempting to defend your honor or explain your perspective, is akin to throwing precious fuel onto a blazing fire. The ultimate power move against a societal or digital predator is absolute, unwavering silence. You block, you delete, and you refuse to let their venom penetrate the sacred fortress of your mind. By recognizing the mechanics of their cruelty across all these different landscapes, you disarm them completely. You are no longer stumbling blindly through a world filled with hidden traps. You have learned the distinct language of predators, and whether they are sharing your blood, sitting in the next cubicle, or hiding behind a glowing screen, you now possess the unwavering authority to deny them access to your spectacular life. Chapter 8. Reclaiming your narrative. The power of expression. There is a specific kind of silence that follows the departure of an emotional predator. Once the frantic energy of the escape has dissipated and the heavy doors of your fortress are securely bolted, you are left alone with the echoes of the relationship. For months, or perhaps even years, your abuser was the sole author of your reality. They held the pen with a ruthless grip, writing a script that cast them as the flawless hero and you as the fundamentally broken, unstable, and perpetually inadequate supporting character. They dictated your worth, defined your flaws, and systematically erased your voice. When you finally break free, you might look down at your hands and realize you have forgotten how to write your own story. But survival is only the first half of the journey. The ultimate triumph over emotional trauma is not just about escaping the predator, it is about aggressively reclaiming the pen and daring to write your way back to a vibrant, powerful existence. To understand why reclaiming your narrative is so vital, you must recognize the sheer psychological damage inflicted by the abuser's words. An emotional predator does not just insult you, they engage in a sustained, calculated campaign of identity theft. They take the brightest, most beautiful parts of your soul and rewrite them as tragic defects. Your profound empathy was rewritten as pathetic weakness. Your vibrant joy was rewritten as exhausting, dramatic flair. Your intuitive intelligence was rewritten as crazy, paranoid delusion. Over time, subjected to this relentless gaslighting and projection, you began to internalize their cruel script. You memorized the lines they fed you, repeating their toxic criticisms to yourself in the quiet moments of your day. Healing requires a radical, uncompromising disruption of this internal monologue. You must externalize the lies they planted in your mind and systematically dismantle them. This is where the profound, transformative power of expression comes into play, particularly through the raw, physical act of writing. Writing is not merely a passive record of your days, it is a highly active, therapeutic excavation of your trauma. Imagine a young woman sitting on her rooftop terrace at dusk, the ancient stones still radiating the fierce desert heat of the afternoon, the faint, rhythmic sound of evening temple bells drifting through the warm air. For years, her partner convinced her that her memory was entirely unreliable, gaslighting her into believing that the abuse she suffered was merely a product of her overactive imagination. She spent her days walking through a heavy, disorienting fog. But tonight she opens a blank journal. She does not write beautiful, poetic prose. She writes the brutal, unvarnished truth. She documents the exact words he used to demean her. She details the timeline of the betrayals, the silent treatments, and the calculated manipulations. As the ink stains the page, something miraculous happens within her brain. The trauma, which had been frozen in the chaotic emotional centers of her mind, is suddenly forced to travel through the logical, linguistic pathways required for writing. By putting her pain into concrete words, she is organizing the messy, terrifying chaos of the abuse into a coherent, manageable narrative. She is literally taking the weapon out of the predator's hands and using it to cut through their web of lies. She reads her own words back to herself, and for the very first time, the fog lifts. The reality of the abuse becomes undeniable, stark, and entirely separate from her own worth. She writes her way to the closure that the predator deliberately withheld from her, proving that she never needed their apology to validate her own truth. But expression does not have to be limited to the written word. Trauma lives deep within the body, and sometimes the wounds are far too complex and agonizing for ordinary language. Reclaiming your narrative means finding whatever medium allows your soul to speak without censorship. It might be stepping into a dance studio, letting the fierce percussive beats guide your body through movements of anger, grief, and ultimate liberation. It might be returning to a dusty canvas and throwing vibrant, chaotic colors against it, painting the fierce storm of betrayal and the brilliant dawn of your survival. When you channel your trauma into art, you are engaging in an act of profound alchemy. You are taking the dark, heavy lead of the abuser's cruelty and transforming it into the pure, blinding gold of your own creative resilience. You prove to yourself and the universe that the predator could not destroy your capacity to create beauty. As you externalize the pain and rewrite the toxic scripts of your past, a vast open space begins to emerge within you. This is the space where your true purpose is born. Post-traumatic growth is not a myth. It is a very real, incredibly powerful phenomenon that occurs when survivors decide that their suffering will not be the end of their story, but rather the catalyst for their greatest contribution. When you survive an emotional predator, you graduate with a masterclass in human psychology, resilience, and the sheer depths of human empathy. You possess a profound, intimate understanding of pain that people who have lived sheltered lives simply cannot comprehend. The ultimate victory over your abuser is choosing to channel that profound empathy into a larger, life-affirming purpose. Think of a man who lost his life savings and his professional confidence to a deceitful, sociopathic business partner. For a long time, he felt utterly hollowed out, stripped of his dignity, and utterly defeated. But instead of letting that bitter betrayal calcify into permanent cynicism, he decides to use his newly sharpened instincts for the greater good. He begins mentoring young, ambitious entrepreneurs, teaching them not only how to build successful enterprises, but how to establish fierce ethical boundaries and protect themselves from corporate predators. He uses the darkest, most humiliating chapter of his life as a beacon to guide others safely through treacherous waters. He finds his true purpose not in spite of the devastating abuse, but directly catalyzed by the profound wisdom and empathy it forged within his spirit. Your purpose does not have to be a grand public crusade. Rebuilding your life and finding your true north might simply mean returning to the quiet passions that the abuser relentlessly mocked. It might mean finally planting that lush balcony garden you always dreamed of, nurturing life and watching it bloom under your careful, loving hands. It might mean volunteering at a local animal shelter, offering your vast reservoir of compassion to creatures who have also known neglect and fear. It means looking at the shattered pieces of the life the predator left behind and realizing that you do not have to put them back together exactly as they were. You are now the master architect of your own existence. You can build something entirely new, something more authentic, more resilient, and infinitely more beautiful than anything you knew before the storm. When you reclaim your narrative, you strip the emotional predator of their ultimate goal. They wanted you to remain a permanent victim, forever defined by the damage they inflicted. But by writing your own way to recovery, by expressing your truth without apology, and by channeling your profound pain into an unstoppable, radiant purpose, you rewrite the ending. You step out of the shadows of their false reality and into the brilliant, undeniable light of your own power. You are no longer just a survivor of someone else's cruelty. You are the fiercely empowered author of your own magnificent destiny, and the blank pages ahead belong entirely to you. Chapter 9. The Empowered Survivor. Choosing agency over victimhood. There is a heavy, suffocating word that clings to the skin of anyone who has just escaped an emotional predator. It is a word that society assigns to you, and for a long time it is a word you must inhabit simply to survive the initial shock of the aftermath. That word is victim. When you first recognize the sheer scale of the manipulation, the gaslighting, and the calculated cruelty you endured, acknowledging your victimhood is a necessary and validating step. It is the profound realization that you were subjected to a psychological crime, that the abuse was entirely real, and that you did not imagine the horror of the invisible war zone you were forced to live in. But there is a distinct, magnificent turning point in the healing journey where that word simply ceases to fit. It begins to feel like an old, heavy winter coat that you are wearing in the blistering heat of the desert summer.
To truly transcend the trauma, you must eventually shed the identity of the victim and fiercely step into the boundless, radiant power of the empowered survivor. Making this transition requires us to confront and dismantle one of the most toxic, pervasive, and deeply damaging myths perpetuated by society, and often by the spiritual community as well. It is the insidious concept of victim blaming. When you finally gather the immense courage to speak your truth, you will inevitably encounter people who ask the most devastating questions. They will ask what you did to provoke the rage. They will suggest that it takes two hands to clap, implying that you somehow co-created the abuse. They might even wrap their judgment in philosophical language, telling you that your own unresolved childhood wounds somehow attracted this predator to you, or that you needed to learn a karmic lesson. Let us be absolutely unapologetically clear. This narrative is entirely false, and it is incredibly dangerous. Emotional abuse is never a collaborative dance. You did not co-create your own emotional destruction. An emotional predator does not mistreat you because you possess a fatal flaw, or because you failed to love them perfectly enough. They mistreat you because they operate on a pathology of profound entitlement and a complete absence of empathy. They chose you precisely because you possessed a brilliant, authentic light that they desperately wanted to consume. Blaming yourself for the calculated cruelty of a disordered individual is akin to blaming a beautifully constructed house for being struck by a tornado. The storm was not your fault. The destruction was not your fault. The betrayal, the manipulation, and the quiet daily degradations were 100% the responsibility of the abuser. However, there is a profound difference between taking the blame for the abuse and taking agency for your recovery. This distinction is the very crucible where true power is forged. Imagine a woman whose family has run a heritage block printing textile business for generations. Her workshop is a sanctuary of vibrant indigo dyes, intricate wooden carved blocks, and the rhythmic sound of fabric being stamped. When she met her partner, he seemed utterly enchanted by her talent and her legacy, but slowly he began to infiltrate the business. He belittled her creative vision, isolated her from her most loyal, master artisans, and drove the enterprise to the absolute brink of ruin while secretly siphoning the profits to fund his own lavish lifestyle. When she finally uncovered the financial devastation and locked him out of her life, the community whispered. They said she should have been more submissive, that her ambition threatened him, and that she brought the ruin upon herself. For months, she sat in the sweltering, empty workshop, the vibrant colors of her life seemingly drained away, crushed under the suffocating weight of this false guilt. She felt entirely like a victim, paralyzed by the enormity of the betrayal. But one morning, as the warm light filtered through the dusty windows, illuminating a forgotten, beautifully carved wooden block, a powerful realization washed over her. She realized that his thievery, his deceit, and his profound malice were entirely his pathology. She did not invite the thief into her sanctuary knowing he was a thief. She invited a man who wore the flawless mask of a devoted partner. The destruction was not her fault, but cleaning up the workshop, negotiating with new suppliers, and designing a magnificent new collection, that was entirely her territory. That was her agency. Owning your agency means recognizing that while you are not responsible for the storm that leveled your house, you are the only one who holds the architectural blueprints to rebuild it. It is the fierce, uncompromising decision to stop waiting for the abuser to experience remorse. It is the realization that you do not need their apology, their validation, or their closure to move forward. You grant yourself closure by actively, aggressively choosing to heal. When you step into agency, you stop asking why the predator did what they did, because you finally understand that their actions were never about your worth. Instead, you start asking what you are going to do next with this one spectacular, deeply precious life you have reclaimed. This empowered stance requires you to embrace a series of profound, life-altering truths. You must accept that your magnificent capacity for empathy is not a weakness to be eradicated, but a superpower that simply requires the strict guardianship of ironclad boundaries. You must realize that anger is not a toxic emotion to be spiritually bypassed, but a highly protective, deeply necessary biological response to having your boundaries violated. Your anger is the fierce bodyguard of your soul, and when channeled correctly, it is the exact fuel you need to propel yourself out of the darkness. You must understand that forgiveness is not a mandatory requirement for healing. You do not owe an unrepentant, remorseless abuser your forgiveness. What you owe is absolute, unconditional forgiveness to yourself for staying, for believing the lies, and for doing whatever it took to survive the invisible war zone. As you anchor yourself in these truths, the transformation is breathtaking. The heavy, suffocating cloak of victimhood drops to the floor. You begin to move through the world differently. You no longer walk with the tentative, fearful steps of someone anticipating a blow. You walk with the grounded, unshakable confidence of a warrior who has stared directly into the eyes of emotional darkness and emerged entirely victorious. You recognize that the abuser's ultimate goal was to leave you fundamentally broken, questioning your sanity and your worth. By choosing agency, by rebuilding a life that is infinitely more joyful, peaceful, and successful than the one they tried to destroy, you enact the ultimate, most devastating revenge. You are no longer defined by what was done to you. The scars you carry are not badges of shame. They are the magnificent, glowing proof of your profound resilience. An empowered survivor looks at the wreckage of the past and does not see a graveyard. They see fertile soil. They understand that the very experiences designed to shatter their spirit have instead forged them into someone truly unbreakable. By owning your agency, you reclaim the absolute authority over your own existence, ensuring that from this moment forward, every single choice, every boundary, and every brilliant victory belongs entirely to you.
Chapter 10. The Ultimate Victory. Thriving in the Aftermath. There is a magnificent, breathtaking view from the summit of the mountain you have just climbed. When you first began this grueling ascent, you were navigating through a suffocating darkness weighed down by the invisible chains of a psychological war zone. You stumbled through the disorienting fog of gaslighting, endured the agonizing chemical withdrawals of the trauma bond, and faced the terrifying silence of your own fortified boundaries. But today, you are standing in the brilliant, unobstructed sunlight. You look back down at the treacherous path you traversed, not with a sense of lingering terror, but with a profound, staggering awe at your own absolute resilience. You have walked through a fire designed to burn you to ashes, and instead of being consumed, you have emerged entirely remade. Even from this glorious vantage point, it is incredibly common for the quiet ghosts of the past to occasionally drift through your mind, carrying the heavy, unanswered questions that used to keep you awake at night. You might still wonder, in fleeting moments of vulnerability, if the emotional predator ever truly loved you. It is the most agonizing question a survivor can ask, but the answer holds the key to your ultimate liberation. The sweeping romance, the dizzying connection, and the breathtaking intimacy you experienced were absolutely real, but they did not originate from the abuser. That profound love came entirely from your own magnificent spirit. The predator simply acted as a highly polished mirror, reflecting your own beautiful capacity for devotion back onto you. You fell in love with your own light. Understanding this means realizing that you did not lose the love of your life. You merely walked away from a mirage. The magnificent, boundless love you poured into that empty vessel still belongs entirely to you, and you can now direct it toward people who are actually capable of holding it. Another phantom question that often haunts the quiet corners of recovery is whether the abuser will magically change for their next partner. You might accidentally see a photograph of them smiling radiantly with someone new, looking like the absolute picture of domestic bliss, and feel a sudden, sharp pang of inadequacy. You must forcefully remind yourself of the rigid architecture of deceit. What you are witnessing is not a miraculous personality transplant, it is simply the beginning of a brand new cycle. The new partner is currently experiencing the exact same intoxicating love bombing that you once did. Behind closed doors, the clock is already ticking toward the inevitable devaluation. Emotional predators do not possess the necessary empathy or remorse required for genuine psychological transformation. By completely releasing the burden of comparison, you free yourself from the illusion that you somehow missed out on their redemption. Your departure was not a failure to save them. It was your ultimate, triumphant success in saving yourself. To truly understand what it means to thrive in the aftermath, picture a woman who spent a decade shrinking herself to fit into the suffocating box her abuser built for her. From a young age, she was a phenomenally talented classical dancer, her soul deeply tied to the ancient rhythms and expressive storytelling of her art.
But her partner, driven by pathological envy, systematically mocked her passion. He complained about the sharp, rhythmic sound of her practice, belittled her performances as a foolish waste of time, and manipulated her into packing her heavy brass ankle bells away in a dark, forgotten closet. For years she walked through her life with a quiet, heavy stillness, her spirit completely, entirely muted. But today, she is standing in the center of her own sun-drenched studio. The heavy monsoon rains are lashing against the tall glass windows, creating a wild, chaotic symphony outside. But inside, she is the absolute master of the storm. She reaches into a beautifully embroidered bag and pulls out those heavy brass bells, tying them firmly around her ankles. She takes a deep breath, raises her arms, and strikes her bare foot against the polished wooden floor. The sharp, resonant sound echoes through the room like a thunderclap. With every fierce, precise movement, she is dancing out the grief, the betrayal, and the years of stifled silence. She is not dancing for an audience, and she is certainly not dancing for his approval. She is dancing for her own profound liberation. She has taken the absolute worst chapter of her life and used it as the fierce, unstoppable fuel to reclaim her most authentic identity. She is not just surviving, she is radiantly, undeniably thriving. You must recognize that by embarking on this journey, you have quietly joined a magnificent, invisible army of warriors. Across the globe, there are people who have had their life savings completely drained, their professional reputations viciously smeared, and their hearts pulverized by emotional predators. Yet, they wake up every single morning and make the astonishing choice to remain soft in a world that tried to make them hard. They choose profound compassion over bitter cynicism. They use their harrowing experiences to mentor others, to build radically safe communities, and to love with an even deeper, more ferocious authenticity than before. The insights gained from surviving an emotional predator are not just defensive shields, they are lenses that allow you to see the absolute precious beauty of genuine human connection with crystal clarity. As we reach the end of this journey together, hear these words not just as advice, but as a solemn, unshakable truth. You are an absolute miracle of endurance. The predator looked at your vibrant, empathetic soul and believed they could effortlessly consume it. They fundamentally underestimated the fierce, indestructible core of your spirit. You have done the grueling, agonizing work of untangling your mind from a web of calculated insanity. You have sat in the absolute depths of despair and painstakingly knitted yourself back together, utilizing a strength you never even knew you possessed. You are not damaged goods, and you are not a tragedy. You are a masterpiece forged in the fires of unimaginable adversity. Take a deep, nourishing breath and look at the vast, spectacularly open horizon stretching out before you. The heavy, toxic narrative that was forced upon you has been completely rewritten. You are the sole author of your days, the fierce protector of your boundaries, and the absolute sovereign of your own heart. The false masks have fallen, the shadows have been banished, and the radiant, magnificent truth of your worth is undeniable. Step forward into your beautiful, hard-won future with your head held high, knowing with absolute certainty that you have claimed the ultimate victory.